Hello and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of Weichert Workforce Mobility for our session From Tactical to Strategic, the Evolution of Mobility Teams. We're especially excited to be hosting this session for audiences in both the Asia Pacific and EMEA regions, so we appreciate you joining us from across different time zones. Today's webinar is about a topic that we spend a great deal of time on within our advisory services practice, as organizations continue to rethink the role mobility plays in supporting broader talent and business objectives. So we're looking forward to sharing some of those insights with you today. Before we get started, a quick note on participation. We encourage this to be an interactive session. Please use the Q&A button feature to submit your questions as they come to your mind. We'll be monitoring those throughout and we'll address as many as we can, but we're going to have a very robust discussion. We're very excited to begin that with you. You can also use the chat feature to share any observations or reactions that you have along the way. Those perspectives often, they really do help us with the conversation. So I do encourage both modes of communication throughout this session. So with that, let's get started. Today's conversation is about how mobility teams are evolving from primarily operational execution to playing a more strategic role within their businesses. And the backdrop for this discussion is the reality that expectations have changed quickly. Mobility teams are being asked to support greater spend, more visibility, stronger risk management, and more business credibility than ever before. Our Designing Mobility for Success research reinforces that shift and shows that while expectations are rising, many programs are still working to build that structure and the tools and the authority needed to meet them. So today I am joined by Casey Sin, who brings the perspective of an experienced global mobility leader, and by Avrom Goldberg, who will add broader subject matter and regional insight from what he's seeing across the organizations, particularly as it pertains to our research. So I was wondering, I would love to get the conversation started. And Casey, if I could ask you if you could give us a little bit of your background and introduce yourself and what's on your mind these days.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for having me here. And it's great to be with Avrom as well. And we've known each other for quite a long time. First is welcome everyone, our friends in Asia as well in EMEA. And I'm not sure for anyone who's dialing in that early in the US except you, Jen. Much appreciated for you being hosting us early morning in your time zone there. You all can go on my LinkedIn, but I think it's just quick intro of myself. I started mobility, my career in mobility, and I've done a couple of career moves in terms of in the rewards functions, so compensation, benefits, tax, and so on. And I actually spent lots of time in consulting, Big Four. And then after that in banking, both on the buy side and sell side, and now in the fintech. Lots of experience, sometimes confused, as a mobility person would say, I'm in between cultures. Maybe, through the discussions, maybe people can get to know me. And if there's anything after that, really happy to actually take more questions afterwards. Last but not least is that in my current role is that I'm wearing three hats. So I'm the head of international and regulatory compensation based out of Singapore for PayPal, as well as I'm the global head for global mobility and immigration. So look after the oversight. So that's going to be an interesting piece of discussions from that perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your background, because it is such a rich and comprehensive background that you have from different areas of mobility. Could I ask, from your perspective as a global mobility professional, what does the business expect from mobility today that it maybe didn't expect, let's even just say 5 years ago?
Well, first I'll say that preparing for today, it wasn't that easy. Avrom gave me some homework, so that's why I was referring earlier in terms of.
Avrom does that.
So Avrom did send me your 2 research papers. And by the way, for those who have not read it, just a shout out here for the team at Weichert. It's a really good piece of work, though. Really good insights, lots of data there. So if you have not had a chance to take a look at that, please do go through that. So yes, Avrom gave me some homework to prepare for today. So I actually did read that. However, the audience will tell me at the end whether I have been a good student or I did cram lots of material before today's session.
I promise.
And a quiz. And before I start, a quick disclaimer. So I'm here. I'm talking on my own behalf. I do not represent PayPal. Everything that I'm going to be discussed today is my own personal views based on my own personal experience. So back to your question, what leaders are talking or expecting today that they didn't have before. As a good student, so I did read your paper. So I'm going to borrow what you had in your paper there. So so in your research findings, you talk about global mobility is described as complex and operational. In my view, even calling it complex is probably an understatement, because I think the difference today is that we are operating in a landscape where the velocity of change is higher than before. I mean, all of us in mobility function, we have witnessed that, so we lived it on a day-to-day basis, and hopefully it's going to be better now on a go-forward basis. So with the conflict in Iran and US, actually, hopefully that's settled. But we all have done that, so there's always something happening. So operating in the landscape, I think, is the velocity of change is much higher than before. So what does this mean? So as mobility professionals, I think that what's happening is that we're expected to respond with greater confidence in a faster and it's more complex environment that what we have. And lastly, not least, is the variables that you have in place. So the starting point is that all these variables are evolving. So you never have complete information. And I think that's the reality that we operate. And yet, in addition to that, we are asked to continue, or we're expected, I would say we're expected to drive operational excellence, because it cannot be just one piece. So you still need to deliver what you're supposed to. So I think driving that operational excellence, I think, is expected in addition to the change in the environment there. So personally, I think the biggest challenge is that, because if you look at it, if you look at what we do in practice, putting things in perspective in practice, we talk a lot about, I mean, your paper talks about a lot about that in terms of the outcome of the research. It's mobility is not theory. We deal in real time. And if you look at this, is that we are dealing with, we need to make real decisions. We're asked to actually work within the constraints. I talk about the evolving variables there, and we need to have outcomes. Most importantly, even though people are talking about AI could simulate empathy, most importantly is that we're dealing with real employees. So employees still at the center of what we do. So it's real human, and you're doing this day in, day out. Mm-hmm. So what your research has shown is that shift in expectation is that also that mobility is now seen as strategic partner. And we've talked about this in this part of the world, is that what does strategic mean? I think mobility has always been strategic, and what has changed also is that it's the urgency, especially driven by currently what we have is now you have AI that actually creates all the immense opportunities to make things happening. So what's expected, I say, to sum that out, is the 3 things that to me is important is there's speed, there's outcome, and experience. I think that's to me what we are asked on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Thank you. Avram, that's a great starting point because it really gets to the heart of the shift from service delivery to business enablement. Are you seeing the same change more broadly across organizations as well? Where's the gap between the expectation and readiness most visible right now?
I wish I could say that yes. I wish I could say yes. I can't really. So basically, if we're talking about the shift in focus from the tactical or logistical to the strategic, yes, seeing that. Talking about the shift in expectation or aspiration on the part of the global mobility function to be more strategic, yes. But ultimately, seeing consistency and shift in consistency in the mandate, the organizational mandate, that's the problem area. So global mobility is often tasked by the business with increasingly strategically oriented factors such as business continuity, risk and compliance related requirements. But on a consistent basis, no, not even when consistently tasked with roles in supporting on an ad hoc basis continuity, risk and compliance. The global mobility function tends not to be structured or resourced consistently to actually deliver consistently. So too often the answers, I would think, to your question, Jim, are no. And some of the key findings in the Designing Mobility for Success study, as you know, actually do support that. It's the inconsistency of enablement, right? So there's aspiration, and then there's genuine enablement. For me also, it's interesting to see that mobility teams increasingly are involved in visa programs, compliance, and remote work policy. So the research shows that way over 70% of respondents from almost 100 global companies across the world are involved in visa compliance, in general, over 60% in general compliance, and almost 60% in remote work policies. Mobility is held accountable for strategic but narrowly focused initiatives like process improvement and vendor management, but yet they spend most of their times managing or handling exceptions, right? Or answering stakeholder questions. So there's that balance, that constant tension field and an expected tension field between the logistical/tactical and the strategic. But for me, the problem area or the alarm bell rings when you in terms of the following two statistics from our survey. One, when respondents are asked whether their corporate global mobility function responsibilities include strategic initiatives, 31% said yes. That's a very low number, right? It's a very low confidence number from corporate global mobility functional representatives in answering this survey question. And what I find particularly interesting from an APAC perspective is that from a regional APAC perspective, the response rate was actually lower by 48%. So only 23% of respondents based in APAC felt that their corporate global mobility function responsibility included strategic initiatives. And that's important, right? Because as I said, close to 100 corporations responded to our survey, and almost 30% of those were actually based in APAC. And then lastly, when asked whether global mobility is involved in significant company events, which include, and then there was the option to choose from definitions of significant company events, one of which was strategy discussions with talent and leadership early on. There was a very miserly 8% that responded to say, yes, we're actually involved. We are asked to get involved in discussions with talent and leadership at an early stage in terms of significant company events. 8% is an alarmingly low number.
Yeah. And as you can see here up on the slide, 84% rate technology is important or very important to program success. But KC, you mentioned earlier, and you made a very, very astute point that it really comes back to the employee. The employees are where that's what we're really working with here at the end of the day. Despite how important that the technology is, which it is, it absolutely is. It's certainly ramping up, and it's accelerating, and being more integrated into mobility programs.
Jen, if I may add to Avron's comments earlier, I think you have this on the slide. I think it's in my experience is that, for example, your first bullet in terms of business continuity, risk compliance, the expectation is implicit. I think it's for example, how many of us on this call right now have been involved in what was happening in the Middle East in terms of what was the playbook? So the things that you get asked, do you have a playbook in terms of moving people out? And do you have a playbook for this and that? And in my experience is that in this case here is that the mobility team was the one leading that with the business. So I think it's you get asked the reality of things on the ground is that I mean maybe lots of you may disagree with me, but what I've seen is that lots of the time is that the mobility team are asked to get involved in this. What I think needs to change is, or is going to change, is that the formality of things is memorializing this. Is that, you know, what does the role of mobility, for example, in business continuity and risk and compliance? Risk and compliance, we're doing this on a day-to-day basis. Implicit, it's part of our work, right? We're first line on defense doing this stuff. So I think the reality and the theory, I think, again, this is my personal view, so you got the research, but I think the reality that I live on a day-to-day basis is we are involved in all these.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the themes that seems to come through strongly in our survey and the research is that the concept of the misalignment, because we have these competing priorities and expectations have expanded. You touched on that earlier. Enablement hasn't always kept pace. We found that half of respondents report clear decision rights. Many say technology is critical, as I showed on the previous screen, yet relatively few have integrated systems, and scope is expanding faster than formal mandates are changing. Whew, that's a lot. So, Casey, when you think about programs nowadays versus perhaps, let's say 5 years ago, you know,
Yes.
which of those gaps tends to create the most friction? Decision clarity, technology limitations, or expanding scope?
It's a quiz, right? So there's no all of the above. So I think all of them are important, actually. And I will not. I mean, I'm going to pick one, but I think all of them are important. Why? So I'm going to pick governance. Let's bear with me for a few minutes here. Why is that? I'm looking at it from a much broader lens here because of my role, responsibilities. I have a governance responsibility as well from a regulatory governance, compliance, or compensation piece there, benefits, compensation, and so on. You know, I would say my first is I think governance tends to create on a practical day-to-day basis. Governance tends to create the most friction.
Mhm.
Okay, why? Because I'll just flip it the other way. So when you have good governance, so good governance should enable speed, not slowing down. Good governance should make it easy to do my work, not to go in a rabbit hole. So it requires clarity. So we talk about who makes decision, what sits in the policy. Do you have a guidelines, or do you call everything policy, guidelines, or standard operating procedure, whatever? You know, what's within there? When escalation is required, versus we all know, we all have experienced that. Those of you who are much better have reached that level of holy grail in terms of you're actually operating in the flow versus grind. So when governance isn't clear, what happened? Work slows down. You spend more hours doing one piece of task. Questions gets bounced around. So I got to Avrom say, hey, check with Jennifer, then copy Jennifer. Jennifer will include other persons. So I start on the email with only Avrom, it becomes like 20, 50 people on that. And you get bounced around and it comes back to you and you still don't have an answer. Decisions ownership are diluted. When you have an exceptions, you talked about exceptions earlier, exceptions takes longer. And overall is that you have more risk in the system than actually you're supposed to actually manage the risk more proactively. Versus when you have a good governance, when governance is clear, good governance is when governance is clear, is that decisions move much faster. Teams are empowered. we become much more efficient as a team. So the whole system works as expected.
Absolutely.
And
But can I just jump in there?
Yep.
It's absolutely spot on in everything that you just said. The central challenge or weak vulnerability, I would say, that our research has identified is that it's impossible. It's almost impossible to get outstanding governance without outstanding design. There's a design flaw in place in this whole equation. Mobility today is being asked to do inherently different work on top of existing responsibilities from the get-go, without corresponding change in structure, skills base, or operating model, oftentimes. The actual design of the corporate global mobility function has not kept pace with all the transitions organizationally and with the way our world has actually changed at a number, in a number of levels in terms of geopolitics, pandemics, and Lord knows what else over the last 5, 10, 15 years. So inherently, underpinning this expectation versus enablement gap is the fact that the global mobility function was originally designed and in many instances has not morphed or changed along with the organization, the rest of the organization and the rest of the world. So, positive drivers that tend to come in and impact global mobility, external, new organizational leadership, mergers and acquisition, broad-based organizational restructure, HR transformation, you name it. Casey, you rightly pointed to what's going on in the Middle East. That's a very specific, significant event, which very clearly brought global mobility back in front and center in a strategic, impactful way, supporting the business in a number of vital contexts. But ultimately, in my view, there is a design, there's a design problem here in that the design of the function has not kept pace with organizational change and change in organizational design and changes in day-to-day operating reality.
I think to be fair is that I think it's probably, for those of you on the call and those of you who listen to that, I think to be fair is that, lots of organizations are working on that to be more agile. I know agile is used very loosely, and I think to keep pace. I think the question is, what does keep pace mean? I think it's you brought a lot of other points here in terms of the scope there, and I think the key for me is that often what happened is that there's no one to do it. Therefore, whoever is there actually ends up doing it. It's not about global mobility. It's actually everyone in the HR function happened to that. I think it's more to do with the organization design itself. But notwithstanding this, I think mobility itself is, we are at a junction where basically is, first of all, is in my role as on my regulatory side, if you look at the regulatory regime that you have, I'm talking very broadly, I'll bring it back and connect to what we're talking here is, if you look at the US itself, the US is very principle-based and they're rule-based, but principle-based in terms of what they do, in terms of regarding from an employee perspective. The EU is actually more prescriptive based. So I think it's a fine balance to your point earlier in terms of the design, whether it's design of a program or design of the function. I think there needs to be a balance between being prescriptive. Earlier, I mentioned is that even if you're government, there will be lots of activities or new situations that is not captured. But the key is that you should have a procedures in place in terms of how to deal with this as a group. So that's where I say principle based. So I think it's a fine balance between having, as you build this, is that having a principle approach versus prescriptive approach, because we've known it, we've seen this. I've seen it right now. I'm dealing with the EU pay transparency. it's so prescriptive that it's crazy. I mean, we have only, I have 10 countries, only Italy has actually finalized the transposition, and we're waiting for that. So if I have to wait for actually every country to actually publish the rule, basically today I will not be in compliance. But I yet know what the overall rule is. So how do I actually translate that into having a principle and yet be prepared for what's going to happen? It's not easy. I think it's easier for me to say it, but I think that's more challenging. And one way, when I bring it back to the mobility function itself, is that having clear governance does help this. But if you don't have clear governance, it actually creates more anxiety. And I think I bring it back because you have more anxiety in the system. Is that it's your team, your mobility team, is the people themselves is actually the chasing every day, and it's not nice. I mean, you want the team. Again, I'll bring it back to it will never be perfect. You will never have all information. However, if we are able, from a mobility function perspective, is allow the team to flourish alongside the business, I think they're able to grow, develop, and be successful. But the how will change. The how, the variables, I say, that's expectations, right? The evolving variables are there, so that's going to change. The outcome is going to change, as you say, because there are many outcomes. So it's being prepared, being equipped to have the skills of the experience to be able to deal with it, in addition to what you already prescribe in your policies, guidelines, whatever it is.
Absolutely. But the slide that Jen's just put up. The slide that Jen. I mean, there are a couple of scary data points on this one, Casey. I mean, the fact that less than 50% of people out of 100 global companies across the planet feel that they're operating in an environment where there are clear decision rights. That's a problem. That's a big problem. I personally also don't understand why 65% are actually using KPIs. Only 42% of them develop collaboratively with suppliers. I mean, I would have thought that number would have been like in the 80s or 90s. I mean, what are the other 2/3 of organization doing? How can you fly blind in in this late in the 21st century, without KPIs to actually guide you? That's another question.
But does that underscore, Casey, what you were saying, that in your opinion, governance is really critical? That's table stakes for most for companies that have a successful program, because if that's in place, these other factors will follow.
Yeah, and I think this is research that's there. As a student, I do read the textbook, but I think there's probably some underlying. So I did test your first bullet point actually with somebody today, and that's somebody that I work with, and asked the same thing. Do you know what decision rights you have? That person took some time to answer me. And because they don't think about this, so I don't know. I mean, it's like, again, it's like, but when I look at them, when I work with these people, this group, the team, they get stuff done. So if not knowing what the decision rights is, but you still get stuff done, maybe I'm missing something here. But I think it's a fair point. I think it's I think it's, in my mind, I mean, often is that I take myself an example, is that so I have the decision rights to approve certain, let's say, above whatever guidelines they have, but somebody else has the decision right to override me as long as it's within the guardrails that we built, as long as not is within compliance. So if I'm the person thinking that, hey, I'm making the decision and Avrom is overriding me, therefore I don't have the decision, therefore it's not clear, I think that's incorrect. Because from a governance perspective, each person in governance has a role to play. So I made a decision, I'm empowered to make a decision based on my role. Then it goes to Avrom to make a decision. And if Avrom decides to make something different over my decision, does this mean that I didn't have the decision? So I think I actually, when I read this, is that I thought like, maybe something is happening underneath this, that I question that 50%, but but the data is the data. But you're right, Jen. I think it's in my mind is that there need to be some clarity. It's not going to be perfect. I think it's having the balance that helps you to move, because you got to move somewhere. It's like you're in a downward spiral. The only way you have an upward spiral, you have to change something at the bottom in order to go up. So if you're waiting for everything to fall in place to start changing, then you keep going down. That's the definition of a downward spiral. So you got to be upward spiral. I mean, some of you who did psychology probably understand, what I'm talking about from a psychology perspective. There,
Right.
I think there's a book written on that. So I think it will never be perfect. It's what do you do with that? And I really believe, we can create clarity, but if you can reach that holy grail, fine. But it will never be that.
Yeah. Well, let's dig in. I really like this theme of governance as being so important, because I think it's something that a lot of mobility professionals sometimes struggle with getting their arms around if they don't have clear decision rights. One of the most important findings in our research is that clarity matters more than organizational design. I think that's a whole topic for discussion and debate, but this is what we found in our analysis. And in other words, where mobility sits matters less than whether people understand how decisions get made, who owns what, and when escalation is needed overall. Casey, from your experience, what governance structures tend to work best in mobility programs?
Well, first is that I do agree with the statement in terms of clarity matters more than org design. I do believe that you don't necessarily need a large team. What you need is clear governance, as I mentioned earlier, because once you have decision rights and ownership are clear, you can operate much more effectively. So I'll expand a bit more what it means is that. So why it matters is that then you can leverage both internal stakeholders and external partners and suppliers. So your ecosystem is that it's more about, I view it this way, it's more about how well the broader ecosystem is aligned and working together versus you're actually the smaller team internally. A smaller team can be a multiplier by actually leveraging the broader ecosystem internally and externally. And so, sorry, and your question in terms of working well, I think I go back to what I said. It's listen, when it works well, there's clarity up front, as I discussed earlier, right? People know what they can decide. As I mentioned earlier, I'm clear that I can make that decision, but I'm also clear that somebody else can actually override that decision based on where they are in the organization. And I know when I need to escalate to Avrom, I know that who is the decision maker. Jen is the ultimate decision maker. Whatever we do, if I disagree or agree to disagree with Avrom, we know that ultimately it has to go to Jen to make that final decision. And it removes the back and forth, because we know that, hey, ultimately it's going to go to Jen, right? So I think that's to me, that's working well. And I mentioned briefly earlier, and like, we want to be in a flow versus in a grind. It's not perfect, but that's in my mind is having that. That's when it works well, when you have that upfront. Yep. Like I said, you may find out that hey, instead of Avrom, we need to socialize with somebody else, and oops, we didn't know. But then we capture it for next time. But we know ultimately it's Jen. So the path to the decision is Jen. But the ability to actually navigate to like, hey, it works well because we know ultimately that's what it is.
But Jen and Casey, we could do probably will end do an entirely different webinar on the following. There needs to be a little footnote to that bold statement: clarity beats organizational design, which I also happen to agree with. But the footnote or the caveat, and this is where design transformation is really important. It's all well and good to say clarity beats organizational design, but that's overlooking resourcing. Is the function, if the function is adequately resourced, then clarity beats organizational design every time. But if the global mobility function is not correctly resourced or adequately resourced, you can have as much clarity as you like. You're still going to have a vehicle that is under immense pressure and is not going to function well.
And
So there is a
I don't
resource
disagree
in
with
this.
you. Sorry, I don't disagree with you, Avrom. I think that's why I actually mentioned that it's about leveraging that extend the broader ecosystem. So you have if you're in an organization that has 10,000 people, it's in my mind is that you have 10,000 resources there. So how do you, of course, you're not going to leverage 10,000 resources. We'll bring it closer to home. So the HR or the
Right.
tax, the finance and so on,
Right.
and bring it much closer to the like of the Weichert, the tax providers and so on and so on. I think it's how do you actually bring this as part of your team? So an extension, smaller team could be a much bigger extension if you can make this work. So I do agree with you. I mean, I think it's we can't just throw the org design on the side and make it work, because at the end of the day, you need to have capabilities. You can have clarity, but you don't have capabilities. What I mean is that you obtain, or you borrow, you buy that capabilities through the broader ecosystem.
Well, I think Jen's going to bring us onto this in a little while, but for those on the call that have not had the opportunity to read the research yet, there's some very interesting findings in the research which actually relate to the fairly astonishing multiplicity of stakeholders that global mobility is actually beholden to. And that is another very, very important, and it ties back to the governance piece, and it ties back to the point, Casey, that you're just making, which I also agree with 100%, right? It's you can proactively enhance governance in your own program by connecting with the right resources in your own organization, right? You don't have to sit and wait for stuff to happen to you. But ultimately, stakeholder alliances is a very, very important mission for the function, and I personally think it's one of the more significant skill sets that is required. Right. The ability to actually build and create, to create and build and maintain stakeholder alliances organizationally is probably one of the more underemphasized skills.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't have one without the other. What we're hearing from what I've been hearing from mobility professionals when I've speak and discuss the results of the research is that mobility can absolutely be involved, but its influence really depends on whether the operating model supports timely, confident decisions. So, what are the things that interrupt that level of confidence? What prevents them from having it? I've heard,
Too many.
yeah, both of you mentioned that the scope has expanded. The fabric of mobility has changed greatly over the past 5 years. Some of them coming from internal impacts and structures, some of them coming from the outside that mobility has to react to, and they're being expected to be not necessarily experts, but very confident in more areas than they were in the past that they may have perhaps outsourced to an expert. They have to be a quasi-expert now on more things in order to give leadership data and decision-making ability very quickly. Casey, could I ask, how are decision rights typically defined, in your opinion, when they're working well?
I think when they're working well, I mentioned earlier, it's clear, right? As I mentioned, who's making decision, how to escalate what's in or out of the policy and so on. But I think it's to a point earlier is what actually prevents it, or actually creates lots of anxiety or stress for all of us from a practical perspective. You may have a really nice policy or guidance somewhere there, but when practice, you're in the midst and you're in the moment there. And I think it's this is not just mobility. Okay, this is my experience across the benefits and compensation and other areas as well, including payroll as well, that I've run before. And it's like you have exceptions, but you're unclear in terms of who has the authority to review and approve, right? It's not clear in the policy or guidance that you have, and so that's quite common actually. And then when this happened, then you kind of hopefully you actually annually or whenever you review your policy or guidance, you take a look at it and probably make it better or build it into your system. So that's actually will slow things down. The other thing that actually often you get lots of questions on that, and you go in a loop on that is the ambiguity in interpretation of the policy. And I've always said to my team is that we write lots of policies on the regulatory compensation team. And when you read this, I need a PhD to actually figure that out. But thanks to AI these days, it's great. But the thing is, that lots of choice of word that you use are ambiguous for different culture. So even me, I was like, I speak English, like, is this what we mean? So when you have ambiguity in the policy, is that it's not clear what its scope, or or is this what we're supposed to do, and so on. So the lack of details there. I think the third one that creates more is that, especially when it involves other people outside your own team, is that cross-functional alignment. And we all know this very well on a day-to-day basis. I'll use the usual team members that we interact with, mobility team, then you have the broader HR. Within HR, there's different function as well within HR. So I'll just leave it HR. Then you have corporate tax, or if teams have employment tax. Then legal, I'll say employment legal if you're dealing with that. And the business, lots of the time is that they're not even aligned. So if they're not aligned, is that you end up being the middle person, because you end up having the last piece of information that needs an answer, and then you're going through all these trying to connect, and that's really time consuming. That's the least piece of work that I would do on mine, but I do. So I think these are the three things that comes to mind, which are I experience this more than any. I mean, there's other stuff, I'm sure.
Yeah, you brought up a great point though, is the alignment among teams and for stakeholders that are involved in global mobility on either a daily or a regular basis. And being able to manage that, whose role is that? It tends to fall on global mobility to make sure that they're educating the other parties within their organization to make sure that everybody is kind of along the same path. So we see here up on the screen that high performance programs share 3 traits according to our research. And you've spoken a little bit about that, Casey. It's clear decision authority, explicit escalation paths, and governance that enables speed. So oftentimes we're trying to support global mobility professionals to find ways to make their programs more efficient so that they can move from that tactical to the more strategic aspect of the program. I'd like to ask the both of you. Avrom, I'll ask you first, so Casey, you can think about your answer. Where should speed win, and where is it most important to slow down so that they can carve out that time to be more strategic and know what to identify?
Oh. I guess the cute answer would be the tactical. In tactical, speed should win, and in the strategic, you should put the proper, devote the proper amount of attention to them and think things through before you actually implement them. That would be my 35,000-foot response.
Yeah, I think that's what the research found as well, is being able to it's where speed can win, is being able to support, having the data to support any of those decisions, and being able.
There's just one other thing I wanted to say, just to piggyback off the whole very interesting governance discussion, in terms of what governance structures work well, and in what differentiates organizations that gets governance right. What strikes me is that the more reactive your global mobility function or more global mobility program is, the less fit for purpose your governance structure relating to the mobility function is. So I think there's a direct correlation between proactivity and speed.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that as well, Casey?
Oh, my answer, I'll take it from what happens in real life of our work. I think it's the speed win when governance is clear. Decisions are made faster for us, which is great for us. We want to get the work done, and so we're empowered to make decisions. We're empowered to get the work done. Execution becomes more efficient. So that's win. That's your execution. So that's your day-to-day things that you know how to get it done. And besides is that when speed wins, it's actually beneficial for me. I don't need to spend unnecessary hours working, and I have a much better personal, I use the word well-being to catch that. So, okay. So I think that's important. But I think the slowdown piece is that also becomes where it's important to slow down. I think that has changed now. It's more often than it used to be. Say 5 years ago. At the beginning, it's 5 years ago. Why is that? Because you need to slow down when you're dealing with new or unfamiliar situations. Anything outside of policy, right? Variables are still evolving. I mean, it's look at when the first time in the U.S. immigration they announced the $100,000 US for H-1B visa. Everybody was scrambling. That was on Friday. I think it was weekend, so it was weekend there. So it's new. It's new information, but the context or the environment that we're operating also is different than it used to be. So I think that's important. And that pause is important because when you're slowing down, doesn't mean you actually, you're actually not doing it. So actually, it's great. You're taking for those of you who was watching New York Knicks and Spurs. So in the last 7 seconds, the New York Knicks did take a pause there before the one. Anyhow, digress. Sorry. So that pause allows.
Very
allows
exciting, by the way.
It's very. I watch a game, so it allows us professionals to step back. So it gives us the opportunity to align minds if needed, align stakeholders. Figure out more inputs, more data points. And it helps us formulate a more considered decisions so that when we move forward, we talked about earlier, I mean, you also talk about it, is that we're expected to make decisions with confidence. Then we can make decisions with confidence based on what we have. I think that these days you have more moments than you need to slow down than it used to be.
Absolutely.
And that's where I think is the experience a bit of our role. Also, your research states that the role and expectation we start at the beginning of the discussion is that expectation has changed, and our role we're expected to become more strategic, and that's because in cases like that is that you need a bit more judgment and experience to actually how do you move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And, in the support of, clarity and decision making, let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about technology, because that was a big area of our survey. Wanted to see how whether or not it was supporting companies in their ability to manage their programs and carve out more time to be more strategic. One of the themes in our survey is the gap between how technology is perceived to be and how fragmented many environments still really are. With over 70% of mobility leaders saying that technology is critical. We talked about that earlier. Yet fewer than 1/3 report having fully integrated systems. Casey, from your experience, where does technology deliver the most value in a mobility program?
Maybe what I'm going to share is probably it's surprise people, but again, this is speaking from experience, okay? So I'm not a tech, even though I do work for a fintech company. So this is how I view things, okay? I view technology, of course, you need data as well, right? So with Without data, you can't make things happen. I view technology and data as efficiency enablers. So they're enablers, right? And where technology actually deliver the most value in mobility programs, I pick 4 key areas. First is, I talked about it earlier, employee experience, right? So improving speed of execution, accuracy, scalability of mobility operations. I think that's one. Second, we talk about risk. It was on one of your slides, risk management. So technology allows us to proactively, and you mentioned it, Avrom, proactively manage risk. For example, it reduces lots of duplications. As we know that lots of us actually have many systems with fragmentation. It reduces fragmentation, and we do lots of manual work. So it reduces that. So we all know that when you have less manual work, less fragmentation, all the stuff is that you have less operational risk, or the operation risk is normal in the system. Third is about decision making. It goes back to decision. So technology enables faster, more confident decisions because automation, I'm going to throw AI on that, but I'm not going to talk about AI, but automation, AI, they can handle now, AI can handle all the repetitive rule-based tasks and provide you with better data insights for you to be smarter as making decisions. And ultimately, I mentioned this briefly at the beginning in terms of, in addition, what has changed. We are expected to drive operational excellence in mobility. So ultimately, it's what drives operational excellence in mobility. So I think these are the 4 key areas in my mind the way I look at technology and data. They're enablers of those efficiency. Of course, there's other stuff that's going to actually benefit us in that. And at the end of the day, is if I look at technology, looking at myself in terms of how I use the various AI now, before that, how I use, Google or whatever, or it's the real value for me. When I choose restaurants, I look at the the information there. So bringing back to me, the real value of technology is about better decisions. If I have to sum that, it's that piece there.
Yeah. I heard you say the word enabler. It can be an enabler. I think that's really important key there. So what delivers value? How can I'm kind of curious, when it comes to data points and workflows and how we can integrate technology in a better way that drives more value for that allows global mobility owners to be able to really be the strategic lever within their organizations, making mobility that central point. Where do mobility leaders typically prioritize tech investments when resources are tight, Avrom? Is it? I found in the survey findings that it was a lot of the things that tend to be the things that help with the workflows and the day-to-day items, rather than necessarily being able to provide that data insight that they can give to leaders. But they want to make that bridge over to it. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. In terms of what the research showed, there were a couple of surprises there in terms of which metrics mattered most, right, to respondents. So employee satisfaction beat everything else hands down, which I guess is understandable. But it was way ahead of things like cost performance and speed of service delivery. Was less than half of respondents' first choice. And what I also found surprisingly low was reporting accuracy came in almost last at 44%. You would think that the need and prioritization of data accuracy might actually be a little higher than that, right? The other thing that I found surprising is when you talk about the ability for technology to allow for tracking and comparison of historical data to reveal trends and patterns in your mobility program. came in stone last behind dashboards, real-time data, external benchmarking, supplier and employee feedback. And again, I found that kind of surprising because you would think that modern, current, contemporary tools enabling better data mining on things specifically like spotting trends and being able to, interpret programmatic trends and benchmark that with comparative organizations or just the general, the market at large. All those things would actually be highly sought after and highly valuable
So
in terms of enhancing your program.
Yeah, and I think that's a really key point there, is being able to make that transition to being more strategic, is being able to not just read data points, but being able to identify the trends in the data points that can actually help to be proactive and inform leadership. So I know we're coming up towards the end. I knew we would run out of time. It's like, it's such great conversation, but we could keep going forever. So I really kind of want to bring us home and talk about skills and leadership, because that's something that I think is mobility professionals are they're going to need to change their skills or upskill themselves within the next 3 to 5 years dramatically. So Casey, if I could ask you, in your experience, which responsibilities have expanded the most for mobility teams in recent years? And somebody with a compliance background, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts behind that.
I think I do agree with what you have there in terms of skills that now matter. And, in the interest of time, I'd say that it's becoming more important now than ever that the ability to speak to another human as a human, not just as a part of a process.
Mm, that's great.
It's controversial, my statement there, but I think it's
nice, very nice.
In the interest of time.
Thank you. And talking a little bit about technology, how is technology changing the profile of the team? You can see here the statistic that's on the screen is that 81% of respondents cited technology and AI as critical skills for mobility professionals. So how is it changing the team itself? Are we seeing any changes there? And this question is for either one of you.
I think it does. I think as I mentioned earlier, I think it's today is the technology and creates more opportunities for all of us. I think it opens a new sets of possibilities that we never had before. So who knows what that would be? So reimagining first is that the mobility itself. But I think it's more importantly is for us as mobility professional is that I think AI fluency is important. I think it's that's going to be key. I don't think, because I work for a fintech, but I mean, it's like I'm surrounded with engineers, but the ability for me to talk to them as a human, not technical, I think is important for me to connect. So that's one. Second is that why I say AI fluency, I think there's so much out there, probably too much in terms of having that access to teach yourself or be taught that benefits you from a development perspective. I bring back to earlier I mentioned is it allows us to thrive. Whether we're able to actually translate this in the company that we are working, that's a different discussion. I don't think personally is that where you work should be the constraint there. I don't know whether that survey was in the context of the work, but I think it creates a truly new ways of looking at things because we have democratized learning.
Great.
I love that talk as a human. I'm going to be using it a lot, Casey, but I will quote the source. So Jen, I would just add to that also slightly tongue in cheek from a skill set point of view. I think ultimately, one of the most significant and ongoing significant skills is simply going to be the mastery and ongoing mastery of the art of the prompt and optimizing pressure testing for AI hallucination. I think those two skills are probably going to be requisite, not only in mobility teams, but in anyone in a business context. And then slightly more seriously, I would actually just say one other thing which I found a little cautionary in our research, and that's just to all just to all us practitioners. When we ask folks, about the skill set proficiency required within global mobility, going forward, and the degree to which that's going to change. I was a bit surprised to see that 2/3 of respondents thought that skills needed in the global mobility function will change moderately, and only 1/5 thought that those skills would change significantly. And whilst a highly hallucinatory 15% thought not at all. And I think that there's a room for flipping the significant and moderate numbers there in terms of where we're at and where we're heading.
Well, I always say about surveys, if you want to wait 5 minutes, it could very well flip.
Just to add to that, if I may, is quickly, is on your business judgment. I can't remember on your research. I can't remember whether I went into details. The way I think about it is that I actually tell all my team members that I call it, whether business judgment, or I say know how your company makes money. So if you know how the company makes money, you can connect mobility decisions to business outcomes easily.
Yeah.
I think that's the first thing. I mean, I was talking to somebody today. I said, go read the financial report that we just published. I think it's I guided the person to some of the sections that actually talks about that, and that way you can pick the same language, same vocabulary, and whenever you're doing the mobility or whatever you're doing, is that it's easily connected with the ultimate business. So I think that's important. If you can talk about how you make money, how the business make money, I think it's you have the trust, you have the influence capability.
I think that's a great point for us to end on, Jen.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. And honestly, it really is.
We need more time,
how your
Jen.
business makes money. It's often overlooked when we're going through the day to day. Well, as we wrap, a few things did stand out clearly. Certainly to me, that mobility is already being asked to operate as a strategic function. From when I hear the both of you talk about this topic very passionately, that seems to come through. But in many cases, structure, data, skills, and decision authority still haven't fully caught up. So that's really the opportunity, right? It's closing the gap between involvement and influence. Casey, Avrom, I know we ran a little bit over, but it was well worth it. Want to thank everybody for joining. And of course, thank you both for this conversation, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.